know that's really awkward, but it's fine. Okay, so what I was kind of referencing at the beginning of class today, just doing a recap, is that Herbert Hoover was the president that was first serving when the U.S. entered the Depression. And he is not doing so well with his philosophy of rugged individualism, minimal government assistance. That's just a little review for you from before we left for break, okay? So when it's time for his re-election, the Republicans do run Hoover as their candidate. I'm actually quite shocked that they would choose to do that. Typically, a party will take steps and initiatives to maybe like run someone else that is more likely to win. Y'all should really follow the whole like Democratic stuff right now, by the way, like the whole like primary elections. There are some things happening that would be very telling of this process. I think Buttigieg endorsed Biden like last night, like roughly like 24 hours after he like pulled out, or 48 hours. So that typically happens. It's pretty much the party against Sanders at this point, it looks like. But anyway, side note, but very interesting in politics. So follow that if you haven't watched current events. But point is, the Republicans ran Hoover probably because he was the incumbent. What does it mean to be an incumbent again?
You're running for re-election.
So you're like the current politician that holds office running for re-election. In a traditional situation, incumbents do have an advantage. I mean, especially if things are going well. In this case, are things going well? No, they're going the opposite of well, and he's wildly unpopular, so it's shocking, but I guess they thought it was their best bet at this point. The Democrats run former Governor Teddy Roosevelt's, former President Teddy Roosevelt's distant cousin. Okay, so the Roosevelts, this is the second Roosevelt president that we've discussed in this unit, actually, as well. But FDR is his distant cousin out of New York, Democrat, but, you know, well-known politician, especially with a family connection there, former president. And the Democrats win this one easy peasy. Like, Roosevelt's a shoo-in, and y'all know he will be elected 3 more times after this. So we will be talking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt through this chapter and the next. He is not only the president of the Depression and New Deal era, he is the president of World War II, which is why, with all these problems he, you know, serves under, he is probably reelected so many times. Is it possible for a president to win 4 elections any longer today? Mm-hmm. What amendment prevents that? Anyone know?
20-something.
It is 20-something. It's the 22. It's 22nd. I always say like 2 terms, 22. That was passed almost immediately after Roosevelt's 4th term to prevent someone from running. So that's just like a fun fact in case you're like, wait, how could he run so many times? But, okay. He is the longest serving, though, president in U.S. history, and he will be always the longest president serving in U.S. history. Okay, so everyone, I think, typically knows the title given to FDR's plan to address the Depression, and that plan is called the New Deal, okay? So Roosevelt's plan to end the Great Depression is known as the New Deal. The New Deal is something that FDR was working on even prior to his election and his like inauguration. He was prepping this for months. The economy is in a really bad place, so he knew he couldn't like worry about trying to make a plan once he was elected. He had to go in with a plan. He's kind of been promoting this, right? So he promoted his kind of plan as having 3 overall goals. And I call them the 3 R's because it's 3 words, each starting with the letter R. That's relief, recovery, and reform. Okay? And quite honestly, it's a progression. Like, the goals he has are kind of a progression of goals. Like, imagine, like, relief is your very, like, short-term goal. Like, people are suffering. What's the biggest issue that people are suffering with right now? What's the biggest problem that's existing in our economy?
Right now?
In the Depression. So it's the U.
Unemployment.
Unemployment's the biggest problem that needs to be addressed, because while there's all kinds of issues that stem from unemployment is like that baseline, like it's not going to get better until people have job access. Recovery kind of refers to, you know, recovery of the economy and building it back up as a whole. But then reform is more like future-minded. Like, let's reform our government and maybe some economic practices we have to prevent something like this from ever happening again. And while we have had recessions since the like Great Depression, like many of y'all might be familiar with the like '08 recession with the housing crisis. I don't know if y'all talk about that in economics and or like civics economics. But nothing was quite like this really since. And a lot of that's because of some of the plans we'll put in place even after World War II to prevent us from going into another economic disaster. So I wanted to talk quickly about the 100 days, which refer to basically the first 3 months that Roosevelt's in office. Like once he's elected in 32, inaugurated in 33, that first like 100-day window in office. It's considered a period of like very intense activity, meaning a lot of like legislation laws are coming out of Congress and they're coming out quickly. This is not common. Like if you actually look at presidents, especially when there's any type of like dual legislature where like you have like a Republican controlled House and a Democrat controlled Senate, a lot of times they kind of butt heads and things pass a lot more slowly. Okay. You did have a lot of activity coming out of Donald Trump's first few months in office. A lot of like executive orders though. Granted, Congress was Republican in both houses. That's different now. Kind of midterm, end of the first term. But point is like for the 40s, 30s, 40s, like that era, 1930s, 15 laws in like 100 days, that's impressive. But this is because everyone's on the same page, and that same page is the people need help. And we got to like create laws and legislation that the people are asking for and that they need, things that Hoover's administration was not promoting. 2 things I want to talk about that he does kind of within those 100 days pieces. He also establishes what's called a bank holiday, where he closes all of the banks like temporarily. Very short period of closing. But he closes them. Not shutting them down as in like they'll never reopen, but he like puts them on like a holiday. Why do you think he does that? Why does he temporarily close or pause all of the banks and their activity? Think about what was happening with the banking crisis once the stock market crashed. So people would stop taking their money out. People don't realize they're the problem. They're not getting the lesson that you're all getting right now. They see everyone losing their money. It's natural human instinct to like, you see your neighbors and everyone losing their money. I'm going to the bank and getting out my money. I don't want to lose it, right? But people don't recognize that that's what's causing all of the money to be lost. So that he just wants to put a pause on it so they can take time to actually explain these things. A couple of days. There will be some chats given. We'll talk about the Fireside Chats in a second, that it kind of explain to people what's been going on with the economy. Just, it's not like a months and months long process, because that's quite frankly almost borderline like unconstitutional. But putting a pause on it, okay? Maybe a few weeks at most, but I really think it was just a couple of days. Okay, so the other thing he has passed is called the Emergency Banking Relief Act, where the U.S. does provide funds to reopen and restart the banks, okay? This is kind of like a bank bailout, where you have like the U.S. government giving financial relief to banks that had lost all their funding, because the banks reopening and reestablishing like financial relationships with their customers is essential for the U.S. economy to kind of rebound, okay? So you may have heard of like the term like economic bailout. Other banks have gotten bailouts before. In the '08 recession, you had some banks that closed and you had some bailouts given by the U.S. government. This is like the U.S. government basically giving a financial hand to certain companies that they feel are essential to like kind of bounce back, okay? There's going to be so much more done within this New Deal. This is just like the tip of the iceberg, and that's something important to understand. Something else that Roosevelt starts doing almost immediately are hosting these things called Fireside Chats, okay? Simply defined as radio talks given to the public about New Deal efforts. Fireside Chats are, you know, Roosevelt's way of kind of like communicating with the American public, with people that are concerned, reaching out to people. He would have a chat that explained like how the stock market crashed. He would have a chat that explained what was happening within banking. He would explain some of his New Deal programs like in detail to kind of, you know, inform the public of what some of his plans were. He would try to tell people to have faith in the banks again. And he would talk in very, like, simple terms, okay? You have to realize, like, a lot of Americans didn't have much more than a high school education, you know? So he can't be talking about brokerage and security and, you know, the SEC. It gets confusing. So he is trying to really kind of come down to like an average level to really make people feel like they can understand what happened, because people are scared. They don't really understand what happened in the economy to make all of this loss occur. And he kind of wants to educate them. The fact that most Americans had access to a radio at this point in history, you know, I mentioned the radio as like one of the most popular and important forms of communication in the 30s. This kind of makes it feel, and this is why it's called Fireside Chat. It's as if Roosevelt's in your living room, like talking it out with you, making you feel better, reassuring you. Do you think this wins him some public support, popular opinion? Absolutely. People compare this action to what Hoover did, and they're like, this guy's actually trying to help us. Okay, so let me be clear about something, and then just like a spoiler alert, the New Deal is not going to fix all the problems. Okay, the New Deal is not going to be the recipe for, like, preventing economic disaster. There's some really important legacies that come out of the New Deal, but most of us, if we've learned about World War II by now, know that World War II is actually what gets the U.S. out of depression, because it can provide way more jobs than this program can. But he's still helping, and he's doing a lot of work to, you know, help overall, right? All right, are there any questions so far? I have a few more things to say, but I just wanted to make sure. Okay. Continuing on here, I want to address two New Deal programs. Let me see. Okay, I need to see how much farther I had to go with this. So there's going to be a second wave of New Deal legislation after his reelection. So this is not that. You see later on your outline, second New Deal. Two examples. This is just two. There are dozens of these programs, y'all. The New Deal is not one plan. It is like several plans or programs or agencies that are created to like address all these problems. So these are just two of those kind of agencies created as part of the first New Deal, okay, during his first term. And that's the AAA and the CCC. The AAA stands for the Agricultural Adjustment Act. Agricultural Adjustment Act. What do you think that agency is targeting, or more specifically, who do you think that agency is targeting if its first term or word is agriculture? Farmers. Very good. Okay, we talked about the farmers being in utter crisis. What was the biggest problem with farming at the start of this kind of era?
They were oversupplying because of 401.
Yes, okay, so you have a severe surplus because you have overproduction, oversupply, prices are dropping, they're not making up their prices. Okay, we also talked about the drought and the Dust Bowl, but really the government can only do so much about the Dust Bowl. You know, the biggest like economic problem is overproduction. And so the Agricultural Adjustment Act will basically, and this is a big word, incentivize, aka pay, farmers to farm less. Incentivize or pay farmers to farm less. Pay more to do less. Wow, that's interesting, okay? Like basically if they would leave so many acres of their land, like ungrown, unharvested, then they were given like a subsidy, like a bonus, like an extra payment from the government. It's like, we'll pay you if you like leave this much untouched. Because what's the effect of that? What does that do?
Prices to go back up.
It allows prices to rebound because they'll pay, they'll be able to like make less, so then they have less oversupply. They're like balancing out supply and demand. If they make less, then they'll sell less and the price will go back up. So it's meant to stabilize that price of goods and crops. It is very interesting though, because if you wouldn't know how that worked or what the problem was, you would think it's crazy. Like if Miss Andrew King came in today and said, hey, we're going to cut down your class sizes, like you can actually only teach 4 instead of 5, we'll actually raise your salary, like sign me up. No, not really, because I wouldn't be able to choose one of y'all to like not teach anymore. But really though, if I could be part-time on a full-time salary, like who's not going to sign up for that? That sounds nice. And that's never going to happen. But for the farmers, it was working. Okay.